In 1985, Weird Science wasn't just a movie. It was neon-bright fantasy and teenage chaos, frozen in time. But the lives behind it didn't stay that way. As the years passed, addiction, disappearance, and brutal transformations rewrote everything. This is Weird Science then and now, and some changes will truly shock you. Anthony Michael Hall as Gary Wallace. Gary Wallace, the awkward architect of chaos in Weird Science, was portrayed by Anthony Michael Hall. At 17 years old, he embodied the emotional core of the film, the insecure mind whose fantasies set the entire story in motion. That quiet centrality made the character linger long after the comedy faded. Born Michael Anthony Thomas Charles Hall on April 14, 1968. In Boston, Massachusetts, Hall grew up mainly in New York City under the guidance of his mother, jazz singer Mercedes Hall, and later his stepfather, Thomas Chestaro, a show business manager. His childhood unfolded inside studios and rehearsal rooms rather than playgrounds. Acting was routine, and by adolescence his schedule was already shaped by adult expectations. As fame intensified, so did confinement. Hall became inseparable from the brainy kid identity, even as his own temperament shifted toward darker, more complex territory. Hollywood resisted that change. Roles thinned, confidence eroded, and frustration surfaced publicly through arrests in 2011 and 2016, including assault charges that led to probation. These moments reframed him in the media. Work did not vanish, but it hardened. Performances in The Dark Knight and the long-running series The Dead Zone showed restraint and gravity, the marks of someone no longer performing youth but surviving adulthood. Stability came later than expected. In 2019, Hall married Lucia Oscarova, and fatherhood followed, slowing a life that had never paused on its own. Today, Anthony Michael Hall is 58 years old. He continues acting in film and streaming television while prioritizing family life over visibility. With an estimated net worth of $4 million, his story feels unsettling not for what he lost, but for how long it took to stop running from what he became. Kelly LeBrock as Lisa, the idealized force that bends reality in Weird Science, was played by Kelly LeBrock. At 25 years old, she transformed adolescent desire into consequence. Lisa controlled, corrected, and exposed the boys who imagined her. The power of the film flowed through her presence. Born on March 24, 1960 in New York City, and raised between New York and London, LeBrock entered modeling as a teenager under constant scrutiny. Her face became currency before her voice had weight. Attention followed her relentlessly, shaping how the world approached her and how she learned to withdraw from it. Privacy dissolved early, and recovery never truly followed. Hollywood amplified the imbalance. Her marriage to Steven Seagal unfolded publicly, then collapsed just as publicly, ending in 1996 amid conflict and accusation. The separation marked a turning point. Rather than rebrand or re-enter the cycle, LeBrock chose disappearance. She relocated to a ranch in California, raising her children far from studios, cameras, and expectation. That retreat deepened with illness. Repeated battles with skin cancer forced her to confront fragility in a world that once sold her as invulnerable. While her legacy remained tied to films like The Woman in Red and Hard to Kill, she resisted nostalgia-driven returns. The distance was intentional, protective, and final. Now, Kelly LeBrock is 66 years old. She lives largely outside Hollywood, appearing selectively while focusing on family and advocacy. With an estimated net worth of $10 million, her story shocks not because she vanished, but because walking away was the only way she survived what fame demanded. Ilan Mitchell-Smith as Wyatt Donnelly. Wyatt Donnelly, the shy mind behind the experiment in Weird Science, was played by Ilan Mitchell-Smith. At 16 years old, he became the emotional counterweight of the film, allowing the fantasy to reveal consequences. That restraint made the character feel real beneath the comedy. Born on June 29, 1969 in New York City, Mitchell-Smith grew up in an intellectually charged household with a psychotherapist mother, Clary Mitchell-Smith, and an art history professor father, Larry Smith. His first discipline was not acting but ballet, which he studied seriously from early childhood. The training instilled precision and self-control, yet it also isolated him socially. When casting directors noticed him, performance replaced movement, and childhood shifted again. The momentum did not last. After early visibility, major roles faded, and by 1991 the film industry had quietly closed its doors. Projects like The Wildlife and the television series Superboy failed to restore his footing. Instead of clinging to diminishing attention, Mitchell-Smith made a radical choice. He left acting entirely, turning away from an industry that had already decided his limits. That exit was not escape, but reinvention. He returned to study, earning advanced degrees in medieval studies and eventually a Ph.D., devoting his life to scholarship and teaching. In 2014, another rupture arrived when he was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, a degenerative eye disease that left him legally blind. The loss of sight forced a recalibration of independence, work, and identity. Today, Ilan Mitchell-Smith is 57 years old. He works as a university professor while living with severe visual impairment far removed from the fame of his teens. With an estimated net worth of around $300,000, his story shocks not through downfall, but through disappearance. Bill Paxton as Chet Donnelly. Chet Donnelly, the volatile older brother in Weird Science, was portrayed by Bill Paxton. At 30 years old, he turned fantasy into danger. Chet's cruelty anchored the comedy in fear, giving the story its stakes. His presence made the consequences feel unavoidable. Born William Paxton on May 17, 1955, in Fort Worth, Texas, his childhood carried an indelible scar. At 8 years old, he stood in the crowd when President John F. Kennedy emerged moments before the assassination, an image that lodged permanently in his memory. Raised in a Catholic household, Paxton also battled early health issues, including heart damage from rheumatic fever. His career built slowly and painfully. Early work consisted of minor, often brutal roles, each one demanding reinvention. Over time, persistence paid off. Performances in Apollo 13 and Titanic transformed him into a dependable leading presence, while television brought acclaim through Big Love and Hatfields and McCoys, earning multiple Golden Globe nominations and an Emmy nomination. Yet the heart condition never left the background. Paxton's personal life offered steadier ground. After an early marriage to Kelly Rowan ended, he married Louise Newberry in 1987, building a family and retreating from excess. Even as he directed films and expanded creatively, his health required constant monitoring. Surgery became inevitable, framed as repair rather than risk. Finally, he died on February 25, 2017, at 61 years old, from a stroke following complications from open-heart surgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. His body was cremated, and his ashes were interred at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Hollywood Hills. With an estimated net worth of $25 million, his death stunned Hollywood. Not because of unfinished fame, but because survival had always been part of his performance. Robert Downey Jr. as Ian, the cruel alpha who weaponized popularity in Weird Science, was played by Robert Downey Jr. At 20 years old, he embodied the film's social predator, the character who turned teenage insecurity into humiliation. His presence sharpened the film's cruelty. Born Robert John Downey Jr. on April 4, 1965, in Manhattan, New York City, his childhood unfolded inside chaos disguised as creativity. His father, filmmaker Robert Downey Sr., struggled with addiction and introduced him to drugs at 8 years old, framing intoxication as intimacy. His mother, actress Elsie Ann Ford, battled alcoholism. Homes changed constantly, stability never arrived, and substances replaced structure before adolescence even began. That early damage matured into addiction. Cocaine, heroin, repeated arrests, and jail sentences followed through the 1990s. In 1999, Downey entered prison, losing his home, his credibility, and his career momentum. Even after a brief resurgence on Ally McBeal, further drug arrests led to his public dismissal, turning success into spectacle. Recovery arrived through consequence, not inspiration. After court-mandated rehabilitation, support from Mel Gibson, and relentless structure, Downey rebuilt slowly. Performances in Iron Man reshaped his image globally, while Oppenheimer later confirmed his artistic authority, earning him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. His personal life stabilized through marriage, first to Deborah Falconer, then to Susan Levin, who became his anchor and collaborator. Today, Robert Downey Jr. is 61 years old. He remains active as an actor, producer, and cultural figure, balancing creative work with family life. With an estimated net worth of $300 million, his story shocks not because he survived addiction, but because he outlived a childhood that tried to destroy him. Robert Rusler as Max. Max, the reckless instigator lurking on the edges of weird science, was portrayed by Robert Rusler. At 20 years old, he gave the film its street-level menace, the kind that felt improvised and real. His volatility made the teenage world feel unsafe. Born on September 20th, 1965 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Rusler's childhood was shaped by movement rather than roots. His family relocated to Hawaii, where he immersed himself in surfing and skateboarding, chasing adrenaline before adulthood. That physical freedom came with exposure to risk, habits forming faster than discipline. When the family later moved to Los Angeles, performance replaced sport as an outlet. Early success arrived quickly, but without protection. Films like A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and Thrashin' positioned him as a cult presence, yet instability followed. Substance abuse interrupted momentum, forcing periods of withdrawal and recovery just to remain employable. The industry moved on while he worked to stay standing. Rusler persisted quietly. Television roles, genre films, and long arcs on series like Babylon 5 sustained his career without headlines. Behind the scenes, sobriety became the real achievement, not fame. His marriage to Erin Louise Jellison offered continuity that early life never provided. In 2026, Robert Rusler is 61 years old. He continues working selectively in film and television while pursuing writing and independent projects. With an estimated net worth of $2 million, his story feels unsettling for its contrast. Suzanne Snyder as Deb, the flirtatious spark orbiting the chaos in weird science, was played by Suzanne Snyder. At 23 years old, she functioned as social contrast, the girl who mirrored popularity while exposing how shallow it could be. Deb didn't push the story forward. She reflected what the boys thought they wanted. That distance made her presence quietly unsettling. Born Suzanne Snyder on October 22, 1962, in Park Ridge, Illinois, she was raised in the Midwest with a disciplined, academically grounded upbringing. Early modeling attention arrived before acting stability, pulling her into an industry that rewarded appearance faster than growth. She balanced college at Northwestern University with auditions, learning to compartmentalize ambition early. The work came steadily, but rarely with leverage. Hollywood placed her on the edge of the frame. Despite visibility, leading roles remained scarce, and momentum stalled. Films like Killer Clowns from Outer Space and Return of the Living Dead. Part 2 built cult recognition without long-term security. Television guest spots kept her present, but never anchored. By the mid-1990s, the pattern was clear. Rather than endure erosion, Snyder stepped away. In 1996, she left regular screen work to focus on family life, choosing stability over reinvention. The decision closed doors quietly, erasing her from a system that rarely forgives pauses. Years later, a brief return through voice work and select projects acknowledged a past the industry had already archived. Now, Suzanne Snyder is 64 years old. She lives largely outside the spotlight, occasionally reconnecting with legacy projects while prioritizing family. With an estimated net worth of $500,000, her story aches not from collapse, but from how easily a visible presence can fade when persistence is mistaken for expendability. Judith Aronson as Hilly Hilly, the confident distraction threading through weird science, was portrayed by Judith Aronson. At 21 years old, she represented the unreachable cool, the girl whose approval shaped the boy's social anxiety. Hilly's ease sharpened the film's imbalance. Born Judith M. Aronson on June 7, 1964, in Los Angeles, California, she grew up the fourth of 5 sisters in a household full of movement and sound. Nicknamed the baby with the beat, she performed early, absorbing rhythm and attention as second nature. Opportunity followed quickly, and the camera felt familiar rather than foreign. Childhood blurred into performance. Success arrived fast and loud. Roles in Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, and later Kiss Kiss. Bang Bang cemented her as a recognizable face, but the pace carried pressure. Aronson chose interruption over burnout, stepping away to study theater arts at UCLA while peers chased continuity. The decision fractured momentum but preserved control. After leaving acting, she rebuilt on her own terms. Aronson entered entrepreneurship, opening a Pilates studio and later an antique shop, earning recognition in Los Angeles Magazine for retail innovation. The shift replaced applause with ownership. Acting returned only selectively, framed as reflection rather than pursuit. Today, Judith Aronson is 62 years old. She balances business, wellness, and occasional appearances tied to legacy work. With an estimated net worth of $800,000, her story resonates for its refusal to beg the industry for permission, choosing exit, education, and autonomy over the slow erosion of relevance. Vernon Wells as Lord General, the exaggerated tyrant parodying menace in Weird Science, was portrayed by Vernon Wells. At 39 years old, he embodied the film's absurd authority figure, a caricature born from real cinematic violence. The role worked because it echoed characters audiences already feared. Born Vernon George Wells on December 31, 1945 in Rushworth, Victoria, Australia, he grew up far from glamour. Before acting, he worked in quarries, sales, and local theater, learning endurance before craft. Australian television gave him structure, but not security. His face quickly dictated how casting directors saw him. International recognition arrived violently through Mad Max 2, followed by Hollywood's embrace of his menace. Roles in Commando and other action films cemented him as a villain archetype. The work was steady but narrow. Hollywood welcomed his presence yet confined his range, turning survival into repetition. As decades passed, Wells continued working without mainstream elevation, finding longevity in genre films and television. His marriage to Grace Kono offered personal stability even as professional ceilings remained fixed. In January 2025, the loss of his Pacific Palisades home in a devastating fire erased decades of memorabilia, a quiet personal catastrophe that rarely made headlines. In 2026, Vernon Wells is 81 years old. He continues appearing selectively while living with the residue of a career built on intimidation rather than acclaim. With an estimated net worth of $1 million, his story feels sobering. John Kapelos as Dino, the watchful background presence in Weird Science, was played by John Kapelos. At 29 years old, he gave the film texture rather than spectacle. Dino was not meant to dominate scenes, but to ground them. His realism balanced the film's excess. Born John Thomas Kapelos on March 8, 1956 in London, Ontario, Canada, he grew up with immigrant roots and pragmatic expectations. Comedy became discipline through improvisation at the Second City. The training favored craft over attention. Film and television followed quietly but consistently. Supporting roles in The Breakfast Club and later The Shape of Water demonstrated his ability to disappear into story rather than sell himself. His career unfolded without scandal, yet without breakthrough. Stability replaced spectacle. Repetition replaced risk. Beyond acting, Kapelos diversified. Teaching, producing, managing a small record label, and mentoring performers allowed him to remain creatively active without chasing relevance. Recognition arrived late, with an Indie Fest Award of Excellence in 2023, honoring longevity rather than fame. The achievement carried weight precisely because it came quietly. Today, John Kapelos is 70 years old. He continues working across acting, teaching, and creative production. With an estimated net worth of $1.1 million, his story resonates for its endurance. Britt Leech as Al Wallace. Al Wallace, the weary working-class father in Weird Science, was portrayed by Britt Leech. At 47 years old, he brought a grounded, tired authority to the film. His presence anchored the chaos around him. The role worked because it felt lived in, not performed. Born Robert Britton Leech on July 18, 1938 in Gadsden, Alabama, he grew up in a world far removed from Hollywood polish. He moved through prep school, college theater, and even a brief period in Army intelligence before acting took hold. The path was steady, but never glamorous. By the time cameras found him, he already carried decades of ordinary struggle. His career unfolded quietly through character roles that rarely led to headlines. Films like Silent Night, Deadly Night, and The Great Outdoors made him recognizable without making him famous. Television kept him working, especially on the Waltons, but stardom never arrived. The industry used his face often, yet never invested in his future. In 1991, Leech walked away from acting entirely. Instead of chasing relevance, he chose purpose, becoming co-editor and publisher of Country Connections, a magazine focused on environmental and progressive social issues. It was a decisive break, not a fade-out. Hollywood lost him quietly and barely noticed. Now, Britt Leech is 88 years old. He lives away from the spotlight with his wife, Catherine Roberts Leech, remembered more by viewers than by the industry itself. With an estimated net worth of $500,000, his life feels bittersweet. Barbara Lang as Lucy Wallace. Lucy Wallace, the restrained, barely noticed mother figure in Weird Science, was portrayed by Barbara Lang. At 48 years old, she gave the film quiet emotional weight. Her role did not demand attention. It asked for endurance. Born Barbara Jean Bly on April 8, 1937 in New York City, her life changed early when polio nearly took her ability to walk and speak. Recovery was slow and incomplete, leaving lasting physical fatigue. Singing in nightclubs helped her survive financially. Faith and discipline carried her forward when certainty disappeared. Hollywood offered her opportunities but rarely permanence. Appearances on Charlie's Angels and films like The Naked Face kept her visible, not secure. Even when she signed with MGM in the 1950s, momentum stalled. Television became survival rather than triumph. Sadly, Barbara Lang died on July 22, 1982, at 54 years old, reportedly from pneumonia. She was taken years before Weird Science reached cult status, leaving behind no fortune and little industry memory. With an estimated net worth of $300,000, her story aches quietly, a woman who endured far more than she was ever allowed to express on screen. Michael Berryman as Mutant Biker. Mutant Biker, the silent, unsettling presence in Weird Science, was portrayed by Michael Berryman. At 37 years old, he gave the film an edge that comedy alone could not create. The character existed to disturb, not to speak. His face did the work before a single line was needed. Born Michael John Berryman on September 4, 1948 in Los Angeles, California, his life began with pain most people never face. He was born with hypohidrotic ectodermal dysplasia, a rare condition that left him without sweat glands, hair, or fingernails. Childhood meant surgeries, isolation, and learning how to survive heat that could kill him. For 10 years, he lived on a wildlife sanctuary, finding calm among animals when society felt unsafe. Acting did not arrive as escape, but as adaptation. Films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Hills Have Eyes did not hide his appearance. They framed it. On the desert set of The Hills Have Eyes, extreme heat nearly broke him, forcing constant medical supervision. His body was always at risk, even when cameras rolled. Hollywood rarely offered him complexity. He was cast as monsters, demons, and outsiders, again and again. Television roles on Star Trek, The X-Files, and Highway to Heaven kept him working, not evolving. The industry used what made him different, but rarely asked who he was beyond it. In 2026, Michael Berryman is 78 years old. He remains active through conventions and selective film work, respected deeply by fans who understand his endurance. With an estimated net worth of $1.9 million, his life feels quietly tragic and resilient. A man who turned a condition meant to erase him into a career that refuses to be forgotten. Ivor Berry as Henry Donnelly. Henry Donnelly, the quiet patriarch in Weird Science, was portrayed by Ivor Berry. At 66 years old, he brought a restrained authority that grounded the chaos around him. His presence was not loud or comedic. It worked as a reminder of order watching a family slowly unravel. Born Ivor Phillips Berry on April 12, 1919, in Merthyr Tydfil, South Wales, his early life was shaped by history rather than Hollywood. As a young man, he served in the British Royal Artillery during World War II, witnessing destruction before ever stepping onto a stage. War left him disciplined, reserved, and permanently altered. After completing his studies in Wales, he carried that weight into adulthood, knowing survival before ambition. The years after the war were unsettled. Berry struggled to rebuild a civilian life, taking small roles in Britain before emigrating to Canada in 1950 with his wife, Helen Joy Brumeld. Work came slowly. He wrote and adapted radio scripts to survive, acting where he could. Eventually, Hollywood called in the 1960s, but it offered no stardom, only steady, anonymous labor. Television became his long road. Appearances in Bonanza and Mission, Impossible kept him visible but never celebrated. He played authority figures, fathers, officers, men who existed in the background while others took the spotlight. Fame passed him by, yet he remained dependable for decades, working until age quietly caught him. Ivor Berry died on December 12, 2006, in Woodland Hills, California, from heart failure. He was 87 years old. He was laid to rest without fanfare, leaving behind a career built on endurance rather than applause. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was $500,000, a modest sum for a man who gave his entire life to surviving war, migration, and an industry that rarely stopped to notice him. Nearly 4 decades later, the laughter still echoes, but the lives behind it tell a very different story. Some of the Weird Science cast found redemption, some faded into silence, and others left us far too soon. Which transformation shocked you the most, and which story will stay with you after the screen goes dark? If you want more then and now journeys like this, subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what time revealed next.